Thanks for having me.
Thanks
I
for coming.
appreciate it.
Uh,
I always love coming to this place. What I'd like to do is maybe after we're done talking,
do a little
just do a little
tour.
walkthrough and
Yeah, well,
give people a,
it's not totally in shambles right now, so that should work on.
yeah. Even this space alone, that's pretty impressive.
It's a sanctuary. I've been listening to John or Jim Finley. He's one of the mystics. Comes from Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton,
Okay.
and he went and did monastery for like 6 years of his life, and in a large respect, this was kind of conceived as a bit of a sanctuary or monastery, but
Yeah.
in such like the practice here like doesn't resemble that externally, but internally it's what it is. This sort of like, how do you create a sanctuary for people to come and be safe enough to be challenged?
Yes, right. Yeah, I've often heard, like, one of the things that I used to chew on is that for real learning to occur, there has to be kind of a baseline or foundation of safety.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, if you think about it, like, what is trauma? We've this word has become so adapted into the work that we do,
oh God,
to the point that it doesn't mean anything.
you, we might get on that soapbox together for the next hour. Yes.
But if we think about what it is, it's like when we take the sort of value statement that comes with trauma, and it just like it's a bad association, right? We hear trauma, we think, oh, bad things happen. Really what it is it's an adaptation for safety.
Yeah.
So we have this experience and our brain scrambles and decides, well, what do I do with this?
Yep.
Like, how do I generate safety?
Yeah.
And when we look at when it comes to drug addicts, that's everything they do is an adaptation for safety.
Yeah.
And that's what drugs are.
Yeah.
It's a solution.
Yeah.
When we begin the conversation of how do you help somebody, it's the first part of the conversation is that drugs are not the problem.
Yep. Yep.
It's the solution. And if you start the conversation with drugs are the problem, people are shut down.
You're gonna miss them.
You're gonna miss them.
Yeah.
Right. And so if trauma, which we collectively agree that that's what we're up against. Goodness. If we collectively agree that trauma is what we're up against, then, and what trauma is an adaptation for safety, then safety is the baseline.
Yeah.
So if I'm unsafe, all the defense mechanisms are up.
Yeah.
And if the defense mechanisms are up and the people that we're interfacing with have really strong defense mechanisms, you're not going to get through to them.
Right. Right.
And so, when we talk about how do you create an environment to promote recovery, we have to define what safety means.
Yeah.
And if those aren't the kind of baseline conversations we have when it comes to treating people,
mm-hmm.
then we're starting from the wrong place.
Yeah.
And what I'm interested in, I'm a craftsman first and foremost, and that's where I've gotten my training. And the whole conversation's about process.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what medium you're working in, it's about process. And if your process starts from the wrong place, your outcome's not going to match the
mm-hmm.
needs. And so when we think about creating anything, whether it's a piece of furniture or a methodology to help people, that's the first questions are what does that need to look like?
Yeah.
And so the first questions here is how do you create an environment that's safe, but not safe in the way my parents' generation perceived safety, which is to eradicate risk.
Yeah.
Like, that's not safety. The absence of risk is not safety.
Amen, brother. We could get on that soapbox together too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then, well, if that's not safety, then what is safety?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting and complicated question.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of questions that, when we think about what is a program, then that's where it begins. So, like, what's the definition of safety?
Well, let's keep digging at that one. What do you like? How do you, when you think of this place, fostering or encouraging a sense of safety? Like, like, what are the components of that for you?
Um, I think one of the first things, there was a woman that came in here pretty early on who was enamored with the place, and what she talked about was the toilet paper. She's like, "Y'all have nice toilet paper," and it just seems like, what are you talking about? Nice toilet paper. And I think what she resonated with is that the decisions that are made take the participants in those decisions into consideration, what their
Yeah.
needs are, what makes them feel good or bad. And we've had every type of toilet paper there is here. That decision's not always about, like, we're not always getting Charmin Ultra
What's
Soft here, but on occasion, what we do is everybody here cooks lunch on the day, and they're given a credit card and sent to the grocery store, and there's no real parameters on that.
Yeah.
Like, the parameter is that by 12:30 we need to eat,
Yeah. Right.
and that's it.
Yeah.
And so guys go to the grocery store with a credit card, and they're able to make the decisions without a whole lot of oversight as to what they're going to get.
Yeah.
And so part of safety is giving people enough freedom and agency to decide how they want to create a space.
Yeah.
Decide what it is that they want, and not have a lot of judgment about that. And
Yeah.
everybody's so different in that respect, but just that, like, sense of autonomy.
Yeah.
When we think about people, especially people who get started in treatment young, I guess one of the easiest ways to define what is safety is to look at what's been taken away, and in some cases just try the opposite.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
so if you've been put in treatment at a young age, the thing that's robbed is autonomy, for good reason.
Yep.
But also, it's like one of the big voids.
That's right. At some point, it has to be reintroduced into the system, right?
In a way that's
in a way that makes sense.
in a way that's non-destructive.
Yeah. Right.
And so one of the questions is, where can you generate opportunities for autonomy that are non-destructive?
Yep.
And so one of the things that looks like, and it's just like a random thing, but it's giving somebody a credit card and saying, go
Yep.
feed us lunch.
Yep.
Hey, there's a list on the chalkboard. Make sure you get the stuff on the list.
Yep.
And if toilet paper's on the list, there's not a brand name next to it. Just go buy the toilet paper you want to buy. And that sounds just so ridiculous, but
Yeah.
I don't think it is.
Yeah. No, all those things count, I think.
Yeah. And so I think safety comes from lots of little decisions, and what the
Yes.
motive behind those decisions is.
Yep.
Right. And if what the motive is here, we were having this conversation about what is treatment, and treatment is a business.
Yeah.
And there is what businesses typically model themselves for is profitability.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, how does profitability become second?
Yeah.
And is there a way you can create an environment where the main priority is people getting better, and profitability comes as a byproduct of that, as opposed to the other way around, where profitability is the motive and you hope people get better as a byproduct of whatever you've created that's profitable.
Yep.
And so people sense those subtle differences. And so if profitability is the motive, you get a directive on what kind of toilet paper to buy, because
That's right.
you're in a wood shop.
It's not the safe toilet paper.
Right. It's the thing that's closest to cardboard is probably the thing that fits a wood shop. So that's what you buy.
Right.
And the more there's those sort of rules and regulations that tell people without telling them that the primary motive here is profitability.
Yep.
Then people get that message.
Yep.
And they respond to that message accordingly. And there's a certain inherent threat in that.
Yeah.
If I get the message that the person I'm working with, their motives is something other than my best interest, and I'm gonna kind of chalk that away, and it's gonna become a litmus test when I'm deciding, why is somebody doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And my thought is, oh, they're doing that to serve their needs. Then I'm under threat.
For sure.
And so one of the tricks about working with drug addicts is that there's a lot of really difficult moments I'm going to have with people.
Yeah.
And in those moments, those are unusual moments. And the person on the other end of that moment is calculating, what's the risk right now? if in that moment, if I'm challenging somebody in a really deep way and they come to the conclusion that this challenge is about me having some set of needs that got nothing to do with the other person being met, then that's just fundamentally a threat.
Yeah.
But if there's enough indicators that maybe that's not it, somebody's not certain why the challenge is coming, then in that moment, there's a chance that we're going to ask a different set of questions about, well, why is this guy coming at me like this? And if I can't immediately say, oh, it's so that he can get his ego needs met, then I have to wonder what it is.
Yeah.
And those moments are like critical in somebody's life.
Yep.
What decision am I going to make right now? Am I going to shut down and lock up defenses, or am I going to like stick around long enough to hear what it is that's being said?
Yep.
So it's a big part of, I think the challenge with staff here is, I have craftsmen who come from a place where it's like the bottom line is the bottom line. That's how I eat.
Right.
And to give them a directive that like, that's not where the bottom line comes from. It's a challenge, It's a challenge to figure out, well, like, how do I let somebody fail?
Yeah.
It's like the whole, in a functional shop, the whole point is to not fail.
That's right. It's production, right? You're trying to get it right, and you're trying
So now I'm saying, like, actually, you got to override
we've got
that.
to leave at least some room for fuck-ups and like people.
Failure.
Let's do it again. Failure.
And it's not just that we like need to allow that. We got to invite that, and that's a real that's a real challenging place to give people directives. And so I think one of the challenges of this place is it's like finding those sweet spots and not giving up on these, like what kind of toilet paper you buy as being really important, but not like nobody's, with the exception of the woman that came in here and said something about the toilet paper, which was just a passing comment. Nobody's going to remember this place and be like, man, they had the softest toilet paper. And so it'd be easy
hopefully that's not what they lead with, right?
But it's tricky to build something and not kind of do away with those in favor of efficiency or finances or whatever, because creating safety is really a subtle thing.
It is. When I think of you and what you do here and my experience with what you do here, I think the other component that creates safety is the structure. And what I mean by that is clients come here and it's a job. I mean, it's I don't know if you even call this, it's a program, but it's also like they're earning a paycheck and there's expectations of 8 to 5 or whatever it is. And you got to show up.
Right.
And for some that structure is difficult, but it also creates safety.
Right.
Like there's this container there of like, this is the expectation for me to do this 5 days a week.
Right.
And, so I think that's a component of safety as well, as just the structure.
100%. And we all know enough about like early childhood development. We look at a parent with a 3-year-old.
They need that.
That's the job of the parent, is to define the boundaries.
Yep.
And so the kid's like, can I go here? And the parents basically has to become a brick container.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here. And like when they're 2 and 3 years old, it's like half your job.
Right.
It's kind of exhausting, right? But it's really important for the kid to understand like where the parameters so that my options aren't infinite too.
That's right.
I think that's one of the things you see in the creative space is that if you tell somebody go make something amazing, they're done.
Yeah.
There's no chance. Even really highly creative people.
Yeah.
They need a container to create in.
Yeah.
Just like children do.
Yeah.
So once I understand, okay, these are the limits, now I can like have a sort of private personal time to discover who it is I want to be,
Yeah.
And it's so it's obvious,
Yeah.
We look at kids and it's obvious, and we look at kids that don't have boundaries in the grocery store or wherever you come across, and you're obvious. Like, oh, we know how that's going to end.
Yep.
And then we see parents who are just like, I'm an immovable object, and it's not because I'm feeling belligerent.
That's right.
It's not because I'm trying to meet my needs.
Right.
Beyond the needs of being a parent. It's because
this is what you need.
I'm showing up and I'm acting as a brick wall.
Yep.
So that you learn where your space is. And it's like the most difficult interpersonal moments that I have are the difference between a 3-year-old and a 25-year-old or a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old is that when you're a brick wall for a 45-year-old, they're just a lot more clever and violent,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know, emotionally manipulative than a 3-year-old is. 3-year-olds, like, negotiation tactics are pretty weak, you
Pretty
know?
primitive. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I'm going to throw a fit.
Right,
Right.
right. But a 45-year-old that's decided to throw a fit is going to throw a fit in a much more creative
And a
way.
45-year-old addict.
Oh
That's
yeah,
what they've
yeah.
been doing their whole lives.
Right.
They're good at that shit.
They've been
They're,
training for this moment. And so,
yes.
like, I think one of my challenges personally is to, it's a tough spot to put yourself in, and to remain true to my job is to create the parameters so somebody feels safe
Yeah.
is sometimes, like, really exhausting and difficult. But as I look back in hindsight with the people that I've done that with, especially, you know, there's a certain type of person that's going to challenge that more than the next. And
Yeah.
I think at the end, even though none of that was fun for anybody involved,
Sucks.
it sucks.
Yeah.
It's the part that people intuitively know, like, oh, okay, that's how I learned how to be, you know.
Yeah.
And there's some respects, like, they've never been given that. They've never been given somebody to say, no, here's the limit, you know.
And I consider that to be one of the deepest forms of care.
Right.
Like, if you didn't care, you would just either say, get out of here.
Right.
Or you would just clam up and
right.
But, like, you're taking the time and you're having the hard conversation. Like we both said, that no one likes that conversation. It sucks.
No.
I can be conflict avoidant myself.
Right.
But
yeah.
But I actually think that demonstrates, like, I care enough about you that I'm going to sit down with you and have this conversation.
And do the battle and suffer.
Yep.
So it's interesting. One of the first times I did a conference here in the treatment industry, you know, I'd done trade shows and conferences in previous businesses. And so I kind of had a picture of how I wanted to show up to one of those things. And so I'm going to the first one. I've been to one, I guess. And so this is the first time I'm going and I'm showing at one of these things. And so I get this idea. What I want to do is I don't want to put any language in my booth. So there's no branding. My logo's not up there. There's no, like, list of all the things we do. And what it was this image, and we can see this later on, and a workbench, and that's all. And the sort of tricky idea of this is that as you're walking down the corridors of a trade show, you kind of, like, read the things and automatically assume you understand what it is, and then just keep walking. And you stop and see your friends, or you stop whatever, you know.
Right.
And the whole point, if you're showing at a trade show, is to get somebody to stop and have a conversation with it. So the simplest way to do that is not tell them anything, and then they get confused and they think, well, what are you doing here? Right.
Yeah.
And there's great conversations that came out of that. So anyway, I'm making the booth, and I'm working with a designer who's a good friend of mine. And we have this idea of this picture that we want to put on the backdrop, where we're making this dining table and then we're eating at the dining table. But just aesthetically, we needed, this dining table. Aesthetically, we needed 3 images. And so she has access to all the pictures that I take, just for easy use. And I say, Dana, whatever you want to do, just pick an image you like, right? So at some point prior to that, I had been listening to a podcast or something coming into work, and somebody used the phrase radical compassion. And it just, like, it hit me in a way where it's like, I've never heard those words put together in that way. And it's something wrong. So I come into the shop and I write it on the chalkboard and take a picture of it as a way, like, that's my way of revisiting an idea.
Yeah.
Is that I have a picture and I'm scrolling through my pictures at some point. I'm like, oh, that's
come back to it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then I forgot about it.
Yeah.
Didn't think again about it. Well, she's scrolling through the images trying to figure out what to put on this image in the booth. And she's like, this is great. She's a practicing Buddhist. She loves the idea. Can we use this? And I think, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I'm driving to this conference, and I'm thinking about the booth, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to get into, and kind of taking stock of what this experience is going to be like. And I realize there's no words in this booth except for 2 words, radical compassion. It's, like, centered in this image. And if I'm honest with myself, I don't know the definition of either one of those words.
Sure.
Like a lot of words.
Sure.
Like, I think I know what they mean. And so if I think about radical, I grew up in the 80s skating, and that's like radical, you know, right? Radical, right? And it's kind of punk rock, and it's kind of like fringy. Yeah, exactly. And then compassion is, like, something to do with your grandmother and tissues and some, like, weird blanket that she's put around you, and she's like, you got a scraped knee or you're sad or whatever, and she's like
I'm gonna
consoling you,
pat
right?
your back and
Yeah, that's
yeah, make you
compassion.
feel better. Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not the definition of either one of those words. So I should look them up. And rather than looking up whatever the pop meaning of it is, I want to find out what the root of the word is. So I go
Yeah.
back to Latin. And the word radical comes from radicalis, which means
Which is
the root.
right? Yeah.
Right. So the idea of being radical is just getting to the root of an idea.
Yeah.
Like shedding away all the leaves and the flowers and the just down to the root, the most foundational parts of an idea. In compassion, calm means with, and passion means to suffer. And so the idea of compassion is not about me holding space for you where I'm okay,
right,
and you're hurting.
Right.
It actually means that I'm opting to suffer with you.
Yeah, I'll enter that space.
I'm going to enter the suffering. When we think about if I'm going to accept help from somebody, the first thing I need to know is that you see where I'm coming from. And so one of the hallmarks of addiction is that I use drugs because it makes me feel whole.
Yeah.
But the collective conversation around drugs is you use drugs and drugs are bad.
Right.
And your life's a fucking disaster. And so that's further evidence that drugs are bad.
Right.
And so while not being conscious of it, what I hear everybody saying is, I'm about to take away your medicine.
Yep.
And so
and we're not talking about what to replace it with or
nothing.
Or,
we just know that your medicine is bad.
Yeah, right.
And so immediately from a very young age, I'm figuring out ways to defend myself because intuitively I know you don't understand what I'm up against.
Right.
And so what compassion is like somebody that sees me, sees me to the point that I can feel from them that what my experience, what I'm sitting in, they've opted to sit in that to the point that they're getting saturated. I'm sitting in a lake and I'm looking across and this guy's wet too.
Yep.
He chose to sit in that same lake.
Yep.
And so there's something powerful when somebody, rather than just coming from this stance of, I'm going to be externally telling you what you're supposed to do and dictating to you, somebody that says, I'm going to sit down and suffer. Like, what kind of suffering we're going to do?
Right. Yep.
You know, I'm here to suffer with you. And it has an impact on people. And so when you're talking about like creating that wall, it's uncomfortable for me.
To sit in that space. Yeah.
To say I'm not moving.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I'm naturally, I don't mind being oppositional. You know, I grew up as a fucking skater, right? There's like a certain pride that comes with being oppositional.
Right.
And so there's a part of me, like I'm not completely, but at the same time it sucks and it hurts. And if I'm sitting in there with somebody, there's no way they don't sense that.
Yeah.
And so after the initial, you know, if I'm sitting down with somebody and saying, here's the wall, after that initial like banter and grappling, we get past that point. It's like, oh, okay, this is hurting everybody. Now what do we do? You know, and there's been some real powerful moments in there, and there's been real tricky moments, and those are the kind of spaces that I'm trying to create, and I'm trying to create them in a way that is real. So rather than saying, hey, I've got an hour a week with you, and what I need to do is I need to generate this conflict.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for it, right? It's going to come. You can't hide out 8 hours a day.
Right.
It's coming, and it's going to come because of the work or because the personal interactions or because of the temperature or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's going to bring it out. And so I don't have to fabricate. It's coming.
That's what I mean, that's the other thing. That's where you and I resonate and have from day one is like the primacy and the importance of the lived experience rather than, you know, you come to me for an hour and maybe retell me something about what happened in your childhood but like, I love like this kind of mixing it up in the real world idea. And like this as a job is the real world.
Yeah. 100%.
So it's like, this is a laboratory where that shit's going to come out.
Right.
So it's almost like you don't have to be in there digging.
I don't have
much
to be in there
or at
digging.
all. Like it's going to come out at some point.
Right. It's coming out.
Yeah.
And so that's like when, you know, I got into this because I kept losing friends and I have always kind of loathed addiction treatment in the industry and never saw myself participating in that. But it gets to a point where you give enough eulogies, you go to enough funerals, and these are people that I was really close with. Two of the guys who were in my wedding are
Yeah.
dead now, and I knew them well. And what I was struck with when those two in particular died is that they wanted to get better.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I saw that,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know where to tell them to go. And even now, knowing everything that I know now, I don't know that I would have found a place to tell them to go
Sure.
of what I know that exists.
Yeah.
And so that was a curious thing, is that I know they want to get better. I know there's ways to get through to these guys.
Yeah.
I'd experienced them, and these are guys that I would spend a fair bit of my free time with, you know, an hour on a Tuesday night and 3 hours on a Thursday night, you know, like in terms of personal time given, a
Yeah.
lot of time was given.
Yeah.
And in those moments, we would get somewhere, and then it would be 3 or 4 days before I'd see them again, and they would have slid, and
Yeah.
and it was this cycle. So I know that, like, if somebody's there giving them that time consistently,
Yeah.
something shifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I started thinking about is, well, what is it that, how do you get to those people,
Yeah.
right? And one of the main factors is time. And so when you're thinking about how do you treat somebody, it seems like, I mean, that's one of the things that I think is unequivocal for everybody, is that if you get into a dialogue and you get deep into the dialogue about what is addiction treatment, one of the main necessities that everybody will agree on, whether they're a 3-day detox or a year-long intensive, is that time is the first part of the equation.
Yeah.
But time is tough to afford.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's like, why is 90-day treatment 90-day treatment? Because that's all the world can afford.
That's right.
On so many different levels. And so in creating this place, what my motive in creating this place is I want to create an environment where it's the highest likelihood is somebody is going to square up to something that puts them on a different trajectory. That's it. And what I need is time.
Because one of the things you're asking for is a time commitment, right? Like,
well, that's
a year, right? I mean, that's fundamental to your
I want
model.
I want people to show up and not be somewhere else in their mind.
Yep.
And how long people stay here is less of a consequence to me than more the mental commitment of, like, I'm gonna be here.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere, and so that I can, like, settle down and feel a sense of safety in the cycle, and do that through 4 seasons. And you know, me, I always ended up in some sort of mental institution in January, like, all the time. January, the crisis is coming, right?
Yeah. For you?
For me, yeah.
Was that like a seasonal
effect? We can call it whatever the hell you want to call it. Christmas is part of that.
Yeah, sure. Coming out of the
holidays is part of that. The lack of light is part of that. All the things, you know, there's a whole load of things. But you could be pretty certain that Jeremy is losing the plot, going to jail, going to some sort of institution, like burning the house down.
Yeah, come January.
It's right. Yeah. And so that means January 15th or February 1st, I'm going to treatment.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be in treatment. And when I'm going to get out of treatment is the time where I thrive.
Yeah.
So as soon as the sun comes back out and the daffodils are blooming, life's good.
You're blooming.
I'm golden. Right?
Yep.
And so I could do really well in treatment for 90 days, because when I get out and when I've gone through this thing, I've kind of like been sheltered through the crisis. I come out the other side, things are good. I'm gonna do well.
Yeah.
And 9 months is gonna go by, and nothing's changed. I've not changed the way I interface with life.
Yeah.
I've just been able to ride the wave, and I got through the eddy and the turbulence, and now I'm in smooth sailing until I hit the next rapid that's coming in January.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's not uncommon. And it's ironic that our treatment doesn't necessarily address that in all cases.
Yep.
And it's that I want to see somebody long enough to where if they're in a cycle with the world, which I think a lot of people are, consciously or unconsciously, I want to see them.
It's going to show back up.
It's coming.
We're going to stay with them long enough that we'll see it.
It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. And so one of the guys who came through here who became a good friend of mine, 9 months in, him and his family decided it was time to go. And I'm like, man, I care a lot for this guy. I don't think this is a great idea. I understand the argument of why it's time to go. I don't like the idea, but I support it. And sure enough, Christmas comes around, and he did really well up to that point.
Yeah.
And then we don't know the specific stories, but we know that he hadn't used heroin up to that point. He left here in like September, October, and he was doing well. Christmas, the family reports this is like the best Christmas we've ever had. We had our son back. The day before New Year's Eve, he goes back out and dies in 14 hours. And I learned a lot from that in where I'm going to draw a line and stand up for what I intuitively sense.
Meaning?
The reason why I didn't say, no, you do not go.
Yeah.
Is because the only way I can make that statement confidently was from a real quiet voice inside of me.
Yeah.
And when I really like somebody and they're easy to get on with, it's harder to make that statement definitively.
Sure. And I think the other piece to that, because we run into this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the other piece to that is you also, it's almost like this tension between that model and no, I actually know a year is better than 9 months, based on my experience. At the same time, like I think both you and I champion and recognize like experience being the best teacher.
Yeah.
And like, okay, hopefully you live, but like I think for us, there's that tension as well. Is like we can have our kind of mandates around what we do and what we don't do.
Right.
But the other piece is like if someone is insisting on something that we think is a bad idea, there's a limit.
Tough.
There's a limit to how much I'm going to try to convince them otherwise.
Right.
Like
for all the ideas people have about what AA is and what AA isn't, one of the most powerful tools that AA has is that somebody shows up and they're not ready. And there's a suggestion that if you're not certain, go back out.
Yeah. Right.
Go try drinking. Like
Right.
if you're not certain you're an alcoholic, go try drinking.
Right.
It's in their basic text, plain as day.
Yep.
And so for 100 years, if you're not ready, just go try it.
Try it again.
And it's powerful. And,
Yeah.
and the point that I think AA knows is that we can only work with people for whom there's no other options.
Yeah. Right.
Why is that the case? Well, the case is simple.
Because they've tried the other options,
Well,
right?
more importantly, is that what we're up against is that you've got to give up the only thing that's made you feel whole in exchange for the thing you've been trying to avoid your whole life, which is sobriety.
Yeah.
And the way you're going to get that is by hanging out with a really strange group of people talking about God.
Yep.
Like, that's a crazy value proposition.
Yeah.
Who's going to accept that value proposition?
Yeah.
Somebody that's got no other options.
Right.
AA recognizes that. From the beginning, they recognized that. And so they said, hey, you're not sure, go back out and drink.
Yeah.
Now, I still think for an alcoholic, it's probably the most effective response. Heroin changed the story.
Sure. There's a lethality there that.
And nobody really knows what to do with that.
Right.
And for all the things AA is, one of the things it's not is adaptive by design.
Yeah, sure.
So
Quite
how do you respond to that? At the point that 12 steps have been the most effective, consistently effective tool that we can suggest somebody go to.
Yeah.
Like it or not,
sure.
Over 100 years, there's not a lot of better options. And it's in anybody's sort of like continuing care pamphlet.
For sure.
Go to 12 steps.
Yep. Start there.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the point that we've got this new dilemma, which is that if I tell you that, there's a chance tomorrow morning you're dead.
If I tell you,
go back out and try again.
You're right. That's right.
There is actually
lethal.
It is lethal.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a bit of a.
And so it's created a curious dilemma for which I've not heard a lot of people offer effective solutions for.
Yeah.
And so it's changed the conversation. Now, it's not to suggest that there's an obvious answer.
Yeah.
But if the conversation doesn't change, then I think we're missing part of the story. And so it's like even the situation I had with the guy I was referring to, it's like I need to adapt. I need to stand up and continue to be a guy. When I look back at that and take stock of the role that I played and what I could have done differently, which is really important. If I'm going to learn how to help people, that needs to happen in every case with people that are successful, people that aren't, by whatever definition you use.
It's kind of continued evolution,
right?
And learning from
my mistakes.
Yeah.
What would I have done differently? And what I would have done differently is just stood a little bit more firm.
Sure.
In that I don't think this is a good idea.
Sure.
Here's the reason why I don't think this is a good idea. and I can't create an ease around at the point you decide this is still what we have to do. I can't create ease around that decision.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean I need to be a dick about it,
Sure. Right.
but I can't allow there to be any confusion
Yep.
about what my experience is in this, and the
Mhm.
reason why is that it's lethal.
Yep.
And this was a situation where that was exactly the case. Now, could that be avoided? It's not even worth having a conversation. But going forward, it's like, oh, okay, and this happened recently with the guy who's going to be leaving soon. And the dialogue was around this guy who's still in sober living, was coming up on his year here. The family was like, it's time for him to go. And the idea was that he was going to leave here and leave sober living at the same time. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't care which place he stays, whether he stays at sober living or he stays here, but you cannot do that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. It's like, you can't do that.
Yep.
That's just a terrible decision. It's too much been invested in this to make a simple mistake like that. And I'm not going to stand by it. And it was clear for them, and that was good. And there was no like ambiguity about that. They saw that and they're like, oh yeah, it actually makes good sense, right? And so that feels like an adaptation that I've made to that situation.
Yeah. What speaking of adaptations, and you and I have had various versions of this conversation, but I always enjoyed diving back in. So Making Whole's been around for 5-6 years now.
6 years in July. Yep.
Yeah, because we're 6 years as well. So speaking of adaptation and evolution, like how has either or both Making Whole evolved, and then how has the kind of broader treatment world evolved in the 6 years that you've been around? What do you see that? What do you see that you like? What do you see that you don't like?
I think I'm going to abstain from talking about the broader treatment world in general.
Okay.
But I will make the statement that I think that, and we've talked about this before, I think that I've been making things for a really long time.
Yeah.
I've been around really accomplished makers as well. And what you will see with accomplished makers is that there is a process about how you make decisions when you're creating something that determines the outcome, period.
Sure.
This is true in everything.
Yeah.
It's true in sports as well. Like, what you decide you're there to do is going to reflect in the outcome.
Yep.
And my experience of treatment is that it is built, and there's no value judgment in this, it is built to make money first.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm thinking about what am I going to create as a treatment provider, it has to survive in the world we live in.
Sure.
You got to pay Duke Energy $346 a week or a month.
Right.
And they don't care what you do.
Nope.
And so that's a fact.
Yep.
The place has to survive. And what's happening is that the models are being built on survival. What will insurance pay for? What can people afford? What this, that, and the other, with the hope that in creating that, you've added enough elements of recovery into that to where there's an outcome, a byproduct. And the byproduct is that people get better.
So secondary to the economic.
Secondary to the economics.
Yeah.
And that's, I understand why that is. I think that there's people who are absolutely in this because they want to help people get better. And faced with the directive from the world, you got to be profitable. You got to figure out a way to survive. And if you can do that, then you can go help people get better.
Right.
To me, it's the wrong way to create environments. So for me, in creating this, before I knew anything of the treatment industry, what I want to do is help people get better.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm at a point in my professional life where I want to build something where people get better as the natural outcome of that exercise. And I want the byproduct to be financial. It's the second part in this. And so when I'm making concessions to ensure that my primary motive is met, those concessions are made around profitability as opposed to around whether or not this is effective.
Yeah.
And so when I look at treatment and I look at the economy as it exists and stuff like that, it feels plain to me that place, if I went to every treatment center in the country and said, okay, take money completely out of the conversation and trust that all the finances that you need will be given to you, and your job is to create a treatment that gets people better, nothing else. And I gave that directive to everybody who runs a treatment program in America. Um, I wonder how similar the thing they create looks to the thing that they possess.
Yeah.
And I'm not certain that they're the same thing.
We
So
were
that's,
taught,
yeah.
you posed that same question about 20 minutes ago, right outside. And I love,
It's a tough question to
it's a
ask.
tough, people
So
have to, if they're, they have to get real.
it's going to require getting real. So
Yeah.
my professional life, I've failed enough times in my life to the point that I'm totally comfortable failing.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy it, but I'm
Sure.
like, I'm happy to wade into failure.
Yeah.
Because I've done it enough,
Yeah.
and I've seen the other side of that. I've got a good, healthy relationship with failure. So in creating this place, I have this notion that, and I don't know that this is proven in the world at large, but I don't think it's a terribly difficult idea. Is that if you do really good things, the universe will reward that. And so when I walked into this, my idea is if you create something that really works, profit in money and the economics will follow that. It's not the way business should be built.
Yeah.
It's not like, that's not, if you go to business school, you get a master's degree in business, there's not an MBA on the planet that suggests that that's the way you should build something. Yeah. Further to that point, I've done that in just purely creative endeavors, craftsmanship endeavors, and it doesn't really work. But when we're dealing with humans in this like super dynamic thing, I think that there's a higher likelihood that it can work.
Yeah.
Than if you're just dealing in commerce.
Yeah.
And selling objects.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I'm going to say about the industry. As far as how does this place evolve, every day it changes.
Yeah.
And it changes for a lot of reasons. We're learning every day. We do things and then we take stock of like, well, how did that work?
Yeah.
And so the kind of work we take on, when we take it on, who we serve, how we serve them. I think the staff's recognition of when it's an opportunity to push and when it's an opportunity to pull back, like these are really subtle lessons, and there's no handbook for doing this, right?
Yeah.
I think what I need and what I'm trying to adapt to be better at, and what I'm trying to push the staff to be better at, is to be like really good listeners, not just to words, but to situations. Mm-hmm. Is like taking a step back and breaking down what is the situation and listening to what is needed. And it's not always the same. And so I think one of the challenges for being like responsive is that there's not a script for being responsive, right? There's not a thing where I can say, okay, I need to train you in this type of modality where you're this, and this.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be times where what somebody needs is a soft hand. There's going to be times what somebody needs is to run into a brick wall.
Yep.
And there's no like necessarily obvious external clues to what those are. All those clues are internal. They're subtle.
Right.
And they require people to listen. Right.
Yeah.
So I think we're becoming better listeners to that. And I think the biggest thing is like you just got to be prepared to get dirty. Yeah. And so for 6 years now, we've shown up here, and I'm willing to suffer. I'm willing to fail.
Yeah.
I'm willing to get dirty.
Yeah.
All in an effort to figure out this bigger question of can you help people?
Yep.
And so going back to that conversation about what AA and what 12 steps can do is help somebody that's totally done. And I don't know that there's a better mechanism to help somebody when they're done. Right? They get social connection, they get directives on how to make decisions, all the things that they need are there. There's a certain group of people that will never be done.
Yep.
So the two sides of this, well, there's this whole middle space of people that aren't quite done yet.
Yeah, right. I don't quite know if I'm done yet.
I don't know if I'm done yet. I don't know where I land on this. I'm not prepared for the value proposition you're offering, which is to give up the medicine.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know that I've ever witnessed a place where somebody in that state has gone and consistently come out better off. gone to a
to
place or an
treatment.
idea or
Yeah.
anything,
Okay.
whatever it is, even
Yeah.
if it's not organized.
Okay.
They go to religion, they go to get a better job, they get a girlfriend, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know any place where I could say, oh, somebody that's in that space should go here and the outcome will be positive. I don't even need to define what positive means, whether that means they get sober, their life gets better and they don't get sober, whatever it is. And so that's what I'm aiming at. That's the question that this place started with. Can you create an environment where people who are not necessarily ready come out better as a result of that?
Yeah.
And so everything that happens here is then run through the filter of that question.
Yeah.
How can this situation, how can this opportunity drive somebody towards that outcome?
Yeah.
And so the next natural question is, well, what is that outcome? And I've had conversations about this. This outcome is not necessarily that somebody abstains from use for the rest of their life.
Sure. Yep.
Not it.
Yep.
This outcome is not necessarily that the person that ought to abstain for the rest of their life doesn't relapse into their condition.
Yep.
So this outcome is not necessarily that somebody is sober the rest of their life. So then if that's not our metric, what on earth are we doing? And if we go back to how treatment is created, the reason why it's so challenging and why an insurance company couldn't go to somebody and say, create me something that works.
Yeah.
And then that's what you go do, we'll pay for it, is because we don't have a clear definition of what works means.
Yep.
There's no metric to say this was successful.
Right.
And so faced with that, you're asked the question, well, okay, well, what am I here to do?
Yeah.
Right. What I know from personal experience is that it's in the first 5 years of somebody's recovery that they end up headed in a trajectory that lands them at an outcome that is their own outcome, the one that they need to be at, right? So I fundamentally believe all of us are built in to every human being is an idea of what we're supposed to be, right? And so the goal ought to be, how do you become that person, right? And so there's this point in the first 5 years where people make a decision whether to set their compass heading in the trajectory that lands them there or not, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to have somebody for 5 years.
Sure.
Nobody is.
That's right.
So that's just simply not economically viable.
Yeah.
So if I have somebody for a year, what could be the outcome after a year to where they are able to be there for the next 4 years?
Yeah.
To be engaged in the dance for long enough to where at some point they figure out how to set the compass heading.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the question. What do you install in somebody to where with that program installed, the natural thing is to get to that point.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a guarantee, but that's like the natural outcome.
Yep.
And so one of the best metrics I have is what is the quality of the questions that somebody asks when they arrive here? And what is the quality of questions that they ask when they leave here?
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody's internal dialogue after a year of being here is to become more contemplative and reflective, aware, and on top of that, they have an understanding of a process of how things are put together. So the combination of an understanding of how things are put together, we use furniture as that, but honestly, like how this dining table is built and how my life as a father or as a husband or as anything is built is not different.
Yeah.
The process is not different.
Right.
So if I have a clarity about the process and the quality of my questions increases, then the likelihood of this table being built is exponentially higher than if I want the table to be built, but I'm asking the wrong set of questions.
Yeah.
Or I want the table to be built and my idea of the process is missing key elements. And so that's the theory here, is that if you can put somebody in a situation where those two things fundamentally are the outcome, that somebody understands process and they have a better set of questions, then the likelihood now that they move on to become the person they're meant to be is just exponentially higher.
Yeah. So can I?
Yeah, please.
So the furniture making and all that you do here, I mean, there's, the very pragmatic, practical purpose of, after a year being here, they've got a skill set that they didn't have before,
Sure.
which is useful. There's a sense of mastery, but then the other piece, which is, probably 90% of what I think you're talking about, is like you're encouraging, you're teaching a way of asking the right questions. Whether it's how do I put this table together,
Right.
or how do I compose my life in such a way that
Correct.
I'm going to move in directions
Right.
that I want to move.
Yeah, and it's not mastery. Like these, nobody leaves here.
I mean, well, a process of
Right.
whether
Right.
it's way, I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it, but it's the process of
100%. So,
yeah.
and so one of the important distinctions is that I'm not creating furniture makers, cabinet
Right.
makers in general. I think people that leave here, when you look at the professions that they return to, most of them don't return to the cabinetry.
Gotcha.
What they return to is what they're good at.
Yeah.
That's what I want to create.
Yep.
I want to create people that are like, wow, this is what I excel at, and now I can be successful doing that.
Yeah.
In the world, because I know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
So like one of the more recent examples is a guy who's been a CPA for years, and he got shit canned from every job he had. Not because he's not a good accountant.
Sure.
He doesn't know how to exist in the workplace.
Yeah.
So how do you learn how to exist in the workplace? Well, that's what you're going to learn.
Yeah.
Just by default.
Yeah.
Of like, how do you fail? What do you do when you fail?
Yep.
How do you ask different set of questions? Where do those questions come from? All those things are what we learn in order to become better in the work world,
Yep.
right? In the relationship world. Same thing's true with relationships, right? You're getting an opportunity 40 hours a week to practice being in relationships and getting constant feedback that's not scripted, right?
It's real. It's real world.
This is real world, right? So if you act like a clown,
someone's going to call you out.
Somebody's going to let you know, either directly or indirectly, that doesn't play, right? And so that's, if we were to sit down and say, how do you create somebody that's successful in life? You need time, you need practice, you need some sort of social interaction, all those kind of things. The only thing left is, well, what's the framework?
Yeah.
And so the furniture is just a framework. It's not important.
Right. It's kind of the context.
Totally a byproduct of what we do.
Yeah.
It's not important. Now, that flip side of that is I've been a craftsman for 25 years. Andy, who's the wood guy, has been doing it for 40.
Yeah.
We come from, his lineage is like a legit lineage. He apprenticed under Nakashima. He's best-selling woodworking author for Taunton Press in their history, editor of Woodcraft. Like, we come from, like, I don't want to make crappy work.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put work out that's not at a high level.
Sure.
And so that's a personal thing. It's like, we're not here making bird boxes, we're serving the world that we've been serving through our professional careers. And that doesn't change, and the standard of excellence of the work we do shouldn't change.
Yeah.
But it's not important.
Yeah.
So it's this curious thing, like, work's not going to leave here that's not right.
Yeah.
And it's not important.
And it's still not the point.
It's not the point. It's not the point. And to a point to, we're going to find a way to get to excellent work. That's what we've done for long enough.
Get the what? Get the excellence?
Find that project. It's going to get done. And if it has to fail 5 times, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a big deal.
Right.
And if it doesn't ever fail, then we're not doing our jobs.
Yeah.
Because one of the things is that you and I have never had a client that had a healthy relationship to failure. Never existed.
Well, I've talked about a couple of other soapboxes. That's another one. And I think you and I have gone down that one. Like, as I see our work at Red Cedar, and I think treatment in general right now, one of our biggest challenges and biggest focuses is transforming or changing someone's relationship to failure.
Right. And so if we return back to my parents' generation, where safety means the absence of risk.
Yep.
That idea has evolved. When we look at any sort of like soapboxes people are on. It's about the elimination of risk.
Yep.
And so what failure represents is that you failed.
Yep.
You did the worst possible thing you could do.
Yeah.
It's the I think my son was reading a book for school, and he's like, this. It was about somebody who's, I don't remember who it was, but it's somebody that becomes successful.
Yeah.
And he's like, this whole book was just so stupid. It was like 9 chapters of this guy just like doing everything terribly, and then it's like the last chapter he was like figured it out, whatever. I'm like, that's every success story.
Yeah.
There is not a success story that's worth telling.
Right.
That's not 9 chapters of failure and then a reflection on how they came to the other side.
Yep.
It's not the other way around. It's not a chapter of failure and then 9 chapters of why they're amazing. And if it is, it's not a truthful book.
That's right. That's right.
So if the only way to success is 9 chapters of failure, we better get really comfortable
let's
failing.
Yes.
And redefining what that means.
Yes.
And so also, much like children, when does a kid get hurt, right? They fall down on the ground and they scrape their knee up and they're not hurt yet.
Yeah.
And they look at their parent and then they decide.
Right. How
am
serious?
Am I hurt
or am I not?
Right. Yep. And the parent that's like, oh my God, that kid's game over.
Yep.
Right. Yep. We're crying. I need the boo-boo thing.
Yep.
And the parent that looks at him is like, okay, yep. Where do we stand? You might be hurt.
Sure. Yeah.
You might not be hurt.
Yeah.
Where do we stand? Then that kid's got to be like, where do we stand?
That's right.
It's not any different with failure.
Yep.
Something breaks, everybody looks at you. And in that split second, part of me being good at failure is recognizing that, like, I can't say that in name only.
Yeah.
And if something breaks, I'm like, ah.
Right.
And then I'm like, oh no, guys, this is okay.
Yeah.
They're like, no, it wasn't okay 5 seconds ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Something fails, we say, okay, what do we do with it next?
Yep.
Now, the only way to get good at that is to break lots of things. I'm to a point now where I'm not going to suggest that when something goes sideways, I don't have an experience of it. But that experience now, I've done it enough times where it feels balanced. And you'd have to ask the people around here if that's true or not. My experience is that it is. And then people were like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, if that's what happens when something really important breaks.
Yeah.
And that's the response, then it makes you re-challenge. And that's part of the reason why the quality of work we want to do is high.
Yep.
High risk, high reward.
Yep.
Is so that there's not any question. It's like you break a bird box. Of course you don't give a shit. Right? Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Right.
You break something that's fucking 20 feet long that's going into
several thousands of dollars.
Right. That's going to be in Dwell magazine.
Yeah.
Now, there's a consequence here. And so when that fails, and I look you in the eye, and your response is to respond to what the failure is about and what we do next.
Kind of a problem-solving, curious.
What is failure? Failure is like, okay, that's evidence that our process didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we're bad?
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the response to failure is like, shit, something bad's happened. Kid falls on the ground, that is like, oh, something bad has happened.
Yeah.
Well, how do we know?
Yeah.
How do we know that's bad, right? It's the old, I've heard the parable told from so many different lineages, whether it's Native American or Chinese. I think it depends on whatever. But the dad and the son and the horse, and they go out into the woods and there's this wild Mustang and they bring it home and everybody's like, oh, that's so good, and the dad says, really, is it? And the next day the son's trying to break the Mustang and the Mustang bucks him off and he breaks his arm and everybody comes and says, oh, that's so terrible, and he says, really? Is it? Yep. And the next day the army comes along to conscript all the kids to go to war and he can't go because he's got a broken arm. There's that element of like the same thing's true with failure. We don't know.
Right.
So what has happened, there is no information yet.
Yeah.
About what that means until we go collect that information. Now, what we might find when we collect that information is lots of things. And one of the things we might discover is that we have fallen short in our own idea of who we are supposed to be as individuals through laziness or a lack of discipline or an unwillingness or whatever it is. That one of those things, and more often than not, that is the case.
Yeah.
And we have to recognize and now sit with that. Now, the only reason why that sucks is if we think that's a reflection on our quality as a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so you
right.
take a drug addict who's not certain they're good enough
Yep.
from the beginning.
Yep.
And so in order to collect an idea that we're good enough, we have to get evidence of that. And so when we're out gathering evidence about whether we're good enough or not, and we fail at something that is as we reflect is because we've fallen short, then that's just reinforcing that. That's where the failure
gets internalized, right?
100%, right?
Just proof that I am
proof that I'm not good
that
enough.
I'm not good
Right.
enough. Yeah.
I look at it now and I'm like, okay, we're in the 9 chapters. We're not at the 10th chapter yet.
Yeah.
Here's more evidence of where like I had to continually prove to myself that if I'm lazy, I get the results of being lazy.
Right.
It's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's like if I do certain things, I get certain results.
Yep.
And sometimes the universe is kind and I can be lazy and I don't get the result. And then I'm like, see, I
got one over.
Yeah. Right. But more often than not, if I'm lazy or I'm undisciplined or I'm unwilling, that's going to reflect. You know, when I look at objects are a reflection of everything that arrived to get there. Right. One of the easiest things to think about in that context is not people related is granite. You know, you look at a piece of granite.
Sure.
And what you see is the evidence of fluid stone and pressure and all sorts of things, right? There's the evidence of a process.
Yeah.
And when I make a piece of concrete, same thing. Every spot in there is the evidence of something that happened. At some point, you can see that if you look closely enough, right? And what's happened. So this dance with failure is a dance with partly at the point we can do that and realize, oh, this broke, I'm not bad.
Yeah, like kind of separating the two.
You get to separate the two in a pragmatic way. And this isn't me coaching, hey, John, next time you break something, this is what I want you to feel. You stand next to somebody and that's what they do.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, well, if he can do that, well, why can't I do that?
Yeah.
And that's a totally different coaching.
Like you modeling that.
So you got to model, like, this is what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's one thing to say, hey, when that thing breaks in half, it's okay, you're okay. Oh, why am I okay?
Right.
Now it's another thing to say, okay, this broke in half. This is how we arrived at breaking it in half. This is what we're going to do in response to this feedback that we've been given by life.
Yep. Yep.
That's the job.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, with our coaching, I call that compassionate problem solving approach.
Right.
Where it's just like, we're both human, shit's going to happen. What can we learn from from the feedback, like you said, that the world just gave us?
Right.
About how you went about it, up to that point.
Right.
What can we learn?
What can we learn?
Yeah.
Right. And I think as we talk about backing up to how's a business created or how's a relationship created, how's anything created, right? Our primary focus is going to reflect in the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think that with dealing with drug addicts, what I find is that they're typically very sensitive, very intelligent people.
Yeah.
There are exceptions to that rule, but that's the typical standard person.
Yep.
Sensitivity is always the case.
Yeah.
Intelligence is often combined.
It is. And the idea there being that sometimes, anyway, that they're sensitive, so sensitive that the world and its circumstances is overwhelming, and so I'm going to self-medicate.
It's unbearable.
And unbearable.
It's unbearable.
So I'm going to self-medicate.
Right.
Yeah.
So you get somebody for whom existing in the world is unbearable.
Yep.
Okay, so what are they trying to do? What they're trying to do is survive.
Yeah.
They're trying to change how they feel.
Yep.
Okay, that's the job. Everybody walks in here, their primary goal, the thing they're trying to do, and they can have any byproduct that comes as a result of this, if they can feel better now. Why do they want to feel better now? Because the feeling they have is unbearable.
Yeah.
It's impossible to exist with.
Yeah.
Everybody walks in here, that's their motive. And so what they create in their life is an obvious reflection of that.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. There is the dilemma of addiction. 100%. It's got nothing to do with drugs.
That's it.
Okay, so now what are we aiming at? So for a lot of people, they want to feel better, but they also want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
They want to change how they think, want to do this. And the scales are, I want to feel better and I want to get better. And as long as feeling better is 51%, you're not going to get better. Yep. And the reason is simple, is that at some point getting better means you're going to suffer.
Bingo.
And there's going to come a point where if your priority is to feel better, 51%, and it comes to this point. Now, there's a lot of things for which getting better feels better.
Sure.
And you never have to put it on the scale and things are fine
right.
and you get a little better.
Sometimes they align.
Sometimes they align. And a lot of treatment is looking for those moments
Sure.
and getting wins and,
Yep.
and developing new
All that.
neural pathways where, hey, this is an example we're getting better. Also feels better. It's great.
Yep. And sometimes getting better sucks.
And sometimes
And
getting
it's
better
painful.
means you're going to have to walk into the darkness.
Yes. Yep.
And you got to walk into the darkness and all the risks associated with that.
Yep. And there's no way around that.
There's no way around that. And so when we think about what are we trying to create, that's a tough situation. So what I'm hoping for people who show up here to create is to develop a new compass setting towards being the person that they're meant to be.
Yeah.
Now that changes the equation. Now, if what I'm aiming to do is survive, the main hurdle of survival is the fact that how I feel is unbearable. And so that's the first problem I've always got to solve.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, is that somebody can stay sober a long time, but if that's their priority at some point, the best way to feel better is to get high. It's the most effective,
Yep.
reliable, right now,
Yep.
I'm going to feel better.
Yep.
End of story. Even the pursuit of getting drugs.
Yep.
Is going to feel better than how I feel.
Yep.
Just that pursuit is going to be amazing.
Yep.
Game over. So if my objective is just to survive and get through this, and that's an animal objective.
Sure.
Basic animal instinct. I just have to survive this.
Yep.
Nobody's been given me a better directive. Our culture unconsciously gives the directive of you got to survive and you got to feel better.
And you got to feel better.
Right.
You got to feel
feeling better is the path to survival.
That's right.
Now, if there's this other directive that's enticing, and that directive is somewhere inside of you are meant to be something.
Mm-hmm.
And people start to recognize that in themselves. This little voice that says, this is what I'm supposed to be. You know, I'm not talking about being an astronaut or something, but just like
there's more to life.
An authentic
Yep.
version of me exists.
Yep.
And that authentic version of me actually fills up my unique set of cups.
Yep.
It fills them all up.
Yep.
And
there's a bigger game to play than just this.
There's a much big, and so now if that's the game I'm playing, failure is a totally different.
That's right.
Then I know I'm in the 9 chapters and the outcome is going to be this.
Yeah.
Now if the game I'm playing is I got to feel better.
I just got to feel good.
Then failure comes and I don't feel better.
Yep.
That's hard to to jump over.
Yeah.
And so really if we back up, the solution to this is having our aim be something different.
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? How do we understand what it is we're aiming at? And that's, building things provides a really good metaphor for that.
Yeah. Would you characterize that as like a purpose, like connecting to some kind of purpose or a deeper value set, or how would you further describe like that?
Man,
that other path.
That's subtle, isn't it? Because I think that my instinct, coming up in the world as it is, coming up in the culture we've come up in, is to equate that with some type of externality that involves a relationship or a job.
Right.
That's my instinct.
Something out there, right? As long if I get it right out there, then I'll have the direction. Right. Yeah.
And that
you're talking about something.
That feels like the easiest place to go with it. And then also, part of how do I know that what I'm aiming at is good is that I need to show it to other people and get their feedback that that's good, right? And so if I can equate my sense of being me, with hey, I'm a lawyer. And I can say, hey, John, I'm a lawyer now. I got my law degree. And you can say, man, that's great. Good job.
Yep.
So proud of you.
Yep.
And you're going to make lots of money and people, and it's going to be great, right? Then I can say, oh, shit, I'm on the right track. Because how do you know you're on the right track when we're talking in this very thin space?
Yeah.
It's like looking at air, right? How do I know air is here?
Yeah.
Right? I've been told that, but I've got no visual evidence.
Yeah.
So I think that's my instinct initially, is to say, oh, okay, how do I equate this with a relationship or a sense of purpose, like being a father or a profession or a hobby or something like that? And the convenience of being you and I sitting here and saying, yeah, it's a sense of purpose. You got to have a job. You got to do these things. And it's not wrong.
Sure, but it's not the whole.
But it so deeply misses the undercurrent that it feels like the wrong answer.
Sure.
But it's convenient. It gives you and I a place to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Where the thing we're talking about is more like what they say about Taoism is like, as soon as you can name it, it's not the Tao anymore.
It's elusive. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that as soon as you can name it, we're no longer talking about it.
Yeah.
And so how do we have a conversation about this thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when I think about it at a deeper level, there are times in my life where it feels like what is happening inside my physical body is in alignment with everything else in the world, like a frequency, right?
Right.
You know, it's like this tuning fork thing where you hit this note and everything feels like
resonating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm even careful to use a word like that because now you and I sound like fucking fish heads. And
well, I'm actually surprised that you took it there.
Yeah, right.
Knowing you like I do.
Right. But that's the best way to describe it.
Sure.
Like, oh, I'm in tune with something.
Yeah.
In a way that's like real.
Yeah.
And I can't put words to it, but I can tell you right now, like, this feels real.
Yeah.
The times where I felt that, and this is why that's not a great example, the times where I felt that the deepest is when I was high as can be. The first times I felt that was on hallucinogens.
Yeah, right.
Right. Now I'm like tapped into the fucking universe, right? This is me.
In a cosmic unity.
Oh, man, it's part of the reason why.
You're resonating with everything.
I'm resonating with everything.
It feels good.
This feels good.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason why I attached my identity so deeply to drugs.
Yeah.
And also the reason that what society had to offer me in return was so wildly insufficient.
Right.
Because at some level.
You had that experience and it's like, and I'm going to go back to what?
I'm going to go back to what?
Yeah.
To sitting at a desk job or going to school.
Yeah.
Or being in a complicated relationship that's like not always fun.
Right.
That's a really tough proposition.
For sure.
And so I identified so deeply with drugs because it, in a sort of synthetic way, I don't know a better way to describe it, that it's like not fully real.
Yeah.
I had the feeling of being in resonance, which is different than being in resonance.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the point I'm looking for the feeling, and I get the feeling like, man, that's enough.
Yeah.
And so going back to what is it, I think that's one of the indicators when I'm there, but it's not necessarily what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so what am I talking about is more about when I do a thing or I'm being in a certain way, and the outcome of being in that way is that I end up in a frequency.
Yeah.
That feels like I'm in tune with the universe. What I need to do is go back to what put me in that position and do that more often.
Yeah.
That's the work I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now, how that equates to being a professional or being a husband or being a father or being a hobbyist or whatever it is, completely unimportant.
Yeah.
But I believe that when I'm doing that, when I'm being that way or I'm doing that thing, wherein the byproduct is that I'm in resonance with the universe that I exist in. If I continue to do that,
yeah,
everything else is going to sort itself out and it's going to be fine, right? Yeah. Now, I'm really careful about getting into the God conversation, but I think that across every culture, that's what we're talking about, is this thing where God is the best word we have for it and the worst word we have for it at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about is this unseen, very like infinite well. And so the question is, how do we get there, right? Mm-hmm. And so it seems like a very important discussion to have, the discussion of God. And it also is the one that kills the conversation the quickest, because the word in itself, if I ask you what that means and we go outside and ask 100 people what that means, it means something different to everybody.
Baggage and connotations for everyone.
Right, but it seems like every culture throughout history, when they interface with this discussion, which seems like the fundamental discussion of being a human being, this is what they conjure in their own cultural story.
Yeah.
is an idea of God, right? And so when I look at that and I'm describing what I'm experiencing as this like way of plugging into the whole thing, it's the same conversation
Yeah.
without and I don't know how to put clothes on that. So what I need to
Sure.
do is tell stories
Yeah.
and but I think that that's the point.
Yeah.
And I think if I can do that, if that's my aim,
Yeah.
everything else is sorting itself out.
Yeah. And when I have conversations with people who struggle with substance use, especially early on, like I point out that that experience that they've had when they're high, whether it's hallucinogens or whatever it is, and they feel that plugged in, there's something, oh, wow, I didn't know this, I could
Right.
experience
Right.
this.
Right.
They come to that from a very human yearning. It's to a very honest place. So I don't pathologize that.
No.
There's no like, that's wrong, but
I'm going to tell you right now, anybody that could feel that reliably with a push of a button, we would be a world full of people
you're going to
pushing
do
that
it.
button.
You're going to do it.
Because it's the deepest thing is to
Yeah.
feel connected to the whole thing.
Yep.
So if we go back to the mythology around that, like, Joseph Campbell was a big influence on me early on and still remains. And basically, as he looks at the mythology of the birthing story, the Genesis into the universe, what that is a separation.
Yeah.
We look at Genesis as a story about separation. That's what it is. Pulled away from the oneness, right?
Yeah.
It's our deepest need.
For sure.
Is to be connected to the whole thing.
Yep.
When we think about all the pathologies we have,
Yep.
about not being good, about not being this, about it's all based on a lack of connection.
Sure.
So we're getting into that. Gabor Mate is starting to like tap on that, and everybody that follows it tapping. Like this is a lack of connection.
Yeah.
I think that has become such a ubiquitous idea now, at least among certain circles, that what connection means, I think, is also much like the word trauma is now becoming too ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough one, but that's ultimately, we're talking about the same thing, right?
Yep.
And so if drugs gave me the answer to life, now, why don't I still do that? Because I will say on some level, what hallucinogens did, real life has never
replicated
to that same level of drama and the sort of technicolor experience of that.
Compelling.
It's compelling, right? Yeah. Nothing's ever equated to that. So why
agreed.
don't I do that?
Right.
The feeling of any other substance, not just hallucinogens, where I'm like totally okay in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
Unreal, right?
Yep.
The only reason I'm not doing that is because it fucking quit working.
There you go.
That's it. If somebody is in the moment where that still works reliably,
do it.
It's kind of tough to talk them down off that ledge.
You got it.
Right?
You got
because like why I'm asking to override the fundamental aspect of being a human being.
Yeah. Kind
of tough to talk. But the dilemma of what does it mean to be in recovery is when now the medicine isn't reliable.
That's right. They start to see that way of being in the world, chasing that feeling of cosmic unity, being plugged in. I feel completely centered in my body and my skin. It has its limitations, right? It doesn't necessarily live well day to day.
It turns out it's not real.
Yeah, right.
It is a chemical thing that's not real.
Yeah.
And so in making an argument for what I'm aiming at now, as opposed to aiming for a way to make drugs work for me, is that it's one thing to put a substance in my body. And we know now what's happening in my brain.
Sure.
Like certain things are getting plugged up and certain things are getting dumped out, right? I put this thing in, those things happen.
That's right.
The quality of the acid has a huge part of that, how much strychnine they've put in that shit, whatever it is, right? So what if I could trigger that same phenomenon with my behavior?
Yeah.
What if I could trigger that same phenomenon like before my behavior with my thinking?
Yeah.
Right? So if I can get my brain to a point where my manner of thinking, generates a manner of behavior which generates this dump reliably. That's a fucking interesting thought.
It is.
That's an interesting thought. So when you look at the monastery I'm talking about, and this guy's describing, basically wakes up at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
He chants Gregorian chants. They do whatever they don't talk.
Yeah.
They work all day long. They study and read.
Yeah.
All day long. And then they go to sleep and they do it all over again.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh God, that sounds horrible. That sounds horrible. I mean, it's romantic, but man, that sounds tough.
Yeah.
I think that pursuit at its core level is trying to strip away everything to the point that you can show up and tap into that on your own. Because if you can do that, it doesn't matter where you go.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you have access to or don't have access to. The worst part of having drugs work so well is when I had to show up to places where I didn't have access to that.
Right.
So, hey, enter Christmas. Why does Jeremy lose the plot in January?
Yeah.
So not only do I not have access to the thing that is my medicine because I'm in the presence of people that don't tolerate that, I'm also dumped into these massive complications in how I interface with life. And that combination of things is like a fucking storm.
That's, yeah.
Right? And so my need for drugs to work exacerbates that even worse. Yeah. And so now I'm in a real purgatory, which is like nothing worse than like knowing the medicine's just like, that's the feeling. Oh shit, I got to get through this Christmas dinner. And the moment I get out, I get to go catch relief. That period of time is excruciating.
Hell. Yeah.
I mean, it feels a lot like hell.
All you can do is think about,
oh my God,
hour and a half, and I can.
Right. Yeah. So the question comes back to what happens if no matter where I go, I have same access to being in unison with the world that I live in.
I have what I need.
I have my needs met.
Yeah.
Which also goes back to that sense of safety.
Yeah.
Right. That we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So then from that standpoint, life's a real different proposition.
Yeah.
Real different, curious proposition.
Yeah.
And so for me, the value proposition for somebody getting better, this is the value proposition. Up until now, it's like, hey, you got to give up your medicine in exchange for the worst shit you can imagine. Is it like, well, if that's the only value proposition, then you and I are not here having this conversation. Right. Eventually, I would have figured out a way to just suffer through drugs or kill myself or whatever, overdose. Instead, there was this other value proposition that if I'm willing to walk into the great unknown and the darkness and this huge amount of risk and walk against so many of the things that I've trained myself not to walk into around risk and uncertainty and all these things, then what I'm going to discover is actually being whole.
Yeah.
So what drugs provided me was a sense of being whole. It was the sensation of being whole that would evaporate before I was ready for it to go.
Yeah.
And what followed was typically not enjoyable.
Yeah.
What I'm going to get to exchange that for is a sustainable sense, not necessarily of being whole, but of getting closer to whole, right? And that's a big difference. Like I said, the sensation from drugs was the sensation of being whole.
Yeah.
And the thing is the human experience doesn't offer being fully whole.
Right.
That's the fucking beginning of the story.
Fundamental, yes.
It's fundamental.
Yep.
But what I can experience is the sense of collecting and making whole.
Yep.
Putting it together, being closer to that. And so the space in between the pain and the enjoyment gets tighter, and I'm all right at my own skin, you know? And so it's a curious dilemma that it's never been Technicolor for me.
Yeah.
But it's stable. Yeah. It's sustainable. I feel like more consistently than not, I'm totally okay in my own skin. And even when things are really difficult and challenging, it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not excruciating.
Yep.
Painful.
Yep.
Still suffer.
Yep.
But
I'll make it.
I'm going to be okay.
I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you and I could talk. We could be talking at this time tomorrow,
Very
which I
easily.
love. And what I'm thinking with these is, I think with many of the people that I talk to, could be the first of multiple
Sure, yeah, yeah.
sit downs. Because one of the places that I would love to hear more about you is just your own personal journey, like what in your life led you to this place. But I think for now this is a great place to stop. Uh,
You gotta know your limits.
at the risk of being here tomorrow morning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise,
It's been
man.
great.
Good.
Okay,
Sweet.
cool.